It didn't happen behind closed doors. It wasn't a quiet termination with HR in a small office. It happened in front of 200 employees, 2 board members, 6 reporters and me. They called it a celebration. The global launch of StratusNet. My life's work. I was seated in the front row next to a man who once begged me to debug his firewall at 3 a.m. Now, he couldn't even look me in the eye. On stage, Miles Kenwick, the newly hired COO with slick hair and Silicon Valley buzzwords, flashed a PR smile and tapped his mic. "Before we dive into this exciting new chapter," he said, "we'd like to recognize someone whose contributions are now part of our legacy." I didn't blink. I didn't breathe. Somewhere deep down, I knew. Then he said my name. My full name. Effective immediately, Leona Hart is no longer with Nexora. Just like that. No warning, no handshake, no context. A large screen behind him lit up with my employee badge. It turned red. Access revoked. There was a pause. A silence too loud to ignore. My face was burning. I could feel my pulse in my jaw. People shifted uncomfortably. A few looked down at their phones, pretending not to see. I sat still. Not because I was stunned, but because I couldn't risk moving. Because if I moved, I might stand up and scream. They were launching a system I built. Every protocol, every fail-safe. 6 years of code, audits, security layers mine, and they just erased me with a mic and a smile. I reached for my badge, unclipped it. But before handing it over, I slid the small wooden USB from the lanyard. My thumb traced the words engraved on it. Build what they can't steal. A gift from my daughter. From a time when I still believed loyalty meant something. I stood up. No words. No tears. Just the sound of my heels crossing polished concrete. And as I reached the exit, I whispered to myself, "You'll need my signature for that." If you've ever been pushed aside while others took credit for what you built, drop a comment. This story is for you. I didn't cry when I stepped outside that auditorium. I didn't scream or call anyone. I just walked. 1 foot in front of the other, past the glass doors I used to unlock every morning before sunrise. Past the security guards who once nodded with respect and now looked anywhere but at me. Past the banners that read StratusNet, "Tomorrow starts, know as if today wasn't stolen." By the time I reached my car, my hands were steady, but my heart was pounding in that deep, distant way, like it wasn't just reacting to betrayal, but remembering every time it had been ignored before. I sat behind the wheel and stared straight ahead, not at the building, but through it. Because Nexora hadn't always been like this. Once, it was a hallway full of folding tables and tangled wires. Once, it was 4 people who believed in the power of building something from scratch. I was the 5th. No one outside the server room ever knew that during a 2011 migration, I caught a data corruption bug 8 hours before it would have wiped out a decade's worth of contracts. I stayed overnight, rewrote the rollback protocol from scratch, and restored 97% of the system. The next day, the CTO shook Miles' hand and thanked him for his risk mitigation strategy. I wasn't even in the room. In 2015, I spent Thanksgiving on a plastic chair next to a crashing node, typing firewall patches with one hand and holding a phone in the other, FaceTiming my daughter in her cap and gown. She graduated college that day. She waved at me and said, "It's okay, Mom. I know what you're doing matters." I believed her. I still do. In 2020, when a ransomware attack broke past our defenses during a national holiday, it was one odd line of script I'd added, just in case, that stopped it from spreading. There was no parade. No internal email. Just a line in a log file that said, "Breach contained, system integrity, secure." I wasn't looking for applause. I never have. But sitting there, in the stillness of my car, I realized something deeper than hurt. I had become invisible in the very system I held together. I was the one who left notes in code for the next engineer, who taught the interns how to build clean logic and resilient infrastructure, who walked into meetings with metrics, not just metaphors. And yet, My name was nowhere in the launch brochure. Not in the press release, not even in the internal timeline slides. Stratusnet had been rewritten as if I were never there. That kind of erasure doesn't happen all at once. It happens when someone says, "Let's make this more user-friendly," and strips away 3 layers of defense you built for a reason. It happens when the new COO laughs in a meeting and calls your protocol over-engineered paranoia. It happens when you give a decade, and they give you silence. And the worst part? You keep giving anyway. Because you believe in the thing you're building more than the people who pretend they invented it. They can rename the dashboards. They can replace the branding, the fonts, even the product philosophy. But the backbone of Stratusnet, the thing that actually worked, was mine. My fingerprints. My logic. My sleepless nights. It's funny. You spend so long trying to make things stable, you forget how easy it is for people to shake your foundation. But I wasn't broken. Not yet. I looked at the small wooden USB sitting beside me on the passenger seat. Build what they can't steal. My daughter gave it to me 5 years ago. That phrase used to feel aspirational. Now, it felt like prophecy. And for the first time in a long time, I stopped thinking about what they took from me and started remembering what they couldn't. Back in my car, the silence felt different. Not the hollow kind that follows grief. This was sharper. Like the air had been sliced in half and I was standing in the middle of it, holding nothing. I didn't start the engine. I just sat there, watching the sunlight hit the windshield, washing everything in this pale, indifferent glow. My phone buzzed on the seat beside me, another flood of automated system emails. Deactivation notice, remote access revoked, account privileges terminated. One by one, the messages popped in like nails being hammered into a coffin. Then I saw it. Subject line. Urgent. Deployment license. Final term. From legal. Dated 3 weeks ago. Flagged. Ignored. Untouched. I opened it. It was a single paragraph, buried in legalese, but I didn't need a second read. Per Clause 7, 4 of the Infrastructure Agreement, global deployment of Stratusnet shall not proceed without dual authentication from the current acting COO and the originating system architect. If unverified, deployment license expires at 1:17 p.m. April 3 RD. I checked the time. 1:13 a.m. They fired me at 11:03. They'd cut me loose with 44 minutes to spare and didn't even realize what they were cutting. I read the line again. Slowly this time. Dual authentication, COO and originating system architect. That last part, originating system architect, wasn't just a title. It was defined in our documentation as the individual who designed 75% or more of the operational framework. That was me. Only me. They hadn't reassigned that role. Because they couldn't. Not without my written consent. Which no one had ever asked for. I leaned back against the seat, letting the reality settle in piece by piece. They could revoke my badge. They could block my accounts. They could hold their champagne launch and pose for press photos and rename the damn protocol if they wanted. But they couldn't launch Stratusnet. Not completely. Not without me. And they didn't even know. Miles probably thought everything was set. He'd rehearsed his lines, memorized the talking points, maybe even scheduled his next podcast appearance already. Reimagining scalable infrastructure. Or whatever nonsense headline he was chasing. But while he was busy claiming credit, they skipped a step. A small one. Just the final lock. I looked at the wooden USB again, still sitting in the console. My fingers hovered over it, almost out of instinct. Build what they can't steal. They thought they'd stolen it all: title, legacy, narrative. But they forgot the clause. They forgot the gatekeeper. They forgot me. The first time I tried logging in from home, I told myself it was just to check one thing. Just to see if the deployment dashboard had updated. Just to feel connected, somehow. But the second my fingers hit the keyboard, reality answered. Access denied. No explanation. No error code. Just a blinking rejection. Cold and clean. I refreshed. Tried another route. Then another. Stratusnet's entire infrastructure, every framework I built, every node I configured, every single security layer I personally reviewed was now behind a wall I could no longer touch. I wasn't just locked out. I was erased. I moved to Slack, out of habit. Typed in a message to Avery, one of the engineers I had mentored for years. Hope launch prep's going okay. I'm around if you need any config insights. No reply. I checked the message status. Delivered. Read. Ignored. It stung more than I expected. I moved to another name, Delaney. She and I once spent 2 hours together debugging a memory leak during the Atlanta blackout. We shared protein bars and terrible jokes. She called me Code Mom. I sent a simple, "Hey, hope you're holding up okay today." Nothing. A few hours later, her LinkedIn profile picture changed. Still smiling. Still employed. Still visible. Just, not to me. They hadn't blocked me. They'd just stopped seeing me. That's how it happens. Not with screaming. Not with confrontation. But with silence. I went through the company portal, just to see if my name was still listed. It wasn't. The org chart had already shifted. My role had been renamed. My projects reattributed. There was a new page under Product Innovation describing Stratusnet's origin, 2 paragraphs of polished, shallow fluff. No mention of system architecture. No mention of failsafes. No mention of me. Miles' name, though? 3 times in the first section. The word collaborative was bolded. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I was surprised, but because I realized this wasn't neglect. It was a process. Intentional. Clean. Corporate. Remove the voice. Keep the output. Reskin the story. Even the team I once led was now being introduced under new management. The tagline on the internal bulletin read, "Agile minds. Future focus." I built the backbone of their future. And now I was a ghost in it. And the people I had trained, defended, stayed late to support, they weren't cruel. They were just surviving. Keeping their heads down. Hoping not to be next. That was the part that hurt most. I didn't need flowers. I didn't expect a standing ovation. But I thought someone would say something. Anything. Instead, it was like watching your reflection slowly fade from a mirror you used to recognize. Line by line. Layer by layer. Not deleted. Just replaced. By lunch, I had stopped checking. Even the cold coffee on my desk had given up steaming. I sat in the quiet of my living room, blinds half drawn, afternoon sun slipping through like a whisper. Somewhere downtown, they were probably rehearsing a speech, stringing together words like evolution and efficiency. And I was here, staring at a screen that no longer remembered me. But there's something about being erased that sharpens your sense of what still remains. I still had my mind. I still had my name. And somewhere buried in that system, behind every simplified diagram and over-polished quote, I still had the key. They removed the woman. But they forgot to remove the lock. I hadn't planned to reach out to anyone. Not after the silence. Not after the unread messages. Not after watching the people I mentored fade into corporate self-preservation. But there was one name I couldn't ignore, Jared Lynn. He was the intern no one wanted to take on last summer, too curious, too awkward, too relentless with questions that didn't fit neatly into meetings. But I saw something in him. Not raw talent exactly, but unfiltered hunger, the kind you can't fake. When everyone else was trying to impress upper management, Jared was sitting in the server room with me at 9 p.m., asking, "Why did you build the redundancy loop like that?" And I'd answer, not because I had to, but because someone once answered me. So when the walls around me closed and every familiar face turned away, I thought of him. I pulled out my phone and typed, "Hey Jared. Quick one. Do you still have read access to the Stratusnet deployment logs? I need a quiet favor, just confirm who holds final override authority in the system." I stared at the message for a moment before hitting send. My chest tightened. I half expected no reply at all. But 5 minutes later, his response popped in. Okay, give me like 1.5. No punctuation. Just like him. I smiled. For the first time in days. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. Then, finally, a second message. This time with an attachment. Found something weird. I opened the file. It was a screenshot of the override access matrix zone of the deepest levels of StratusNet's deployment protocol. 2 names. Only 2. COO, Miles Kenwick. System Architect, Leona Hart. No backups. No alternates. No proxy authorizations. Just him. And me. Underneath, Jared had written, "Yours is still active. Biometrics registered in core code. If you're out, they're locked." I reread the sentence 3 times. Biometric registered. Still active. My override key had never been disabled. Miles hadn't removed me from the final gate because most likely he didn't even know where it was. And no one else in the new leadership circle would have known how to find it. They were in such a rush to push me out, they forgot to ask the most important question. What does she still control? I typed back, "Don't share that screenshot with anyone. And keep your instincts sharp." He replied with a thumbs up emoji. Always do. I set my phone down and just breathed. Not in relief because this wasn't over, but in clarity. They'd closed every visible door, but they missed the one entrance only I knew existed. It wasn't sabotage. It wasn't even resistance. It was structure. A system designed not for revenge, but for responsibility. They thought I was gone, but the code still knew who wrote it. And now? So did I. The next morning, I didn't open my laptop right away. I sat at the kitchen table, fingers wrapped around a cup of lukewarm tea, staring at nothing in particular. There was a kind of stillness in the room that didn't ask to be broken. It just hovered. I'd been up since 4 a.m., checking the time without really knowing why. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was something deeper. An instinct honed over decades of being the one who kept things from falling apart. 1:17 a.m. That was the deadline embedded in clause 744. The moment StratusNet's deployment license would expire if dual authentication wasn't completed. I glanced at the USB on the counter. The wooden one. Engraved. Familiar. Still untouched. Still mine. At 11:05. I finally moved to my desk and opened the secure terminal I hadn't used in years zone I built myself, back when remote access wasn't a luxury, but a necessity. I typed in the old credentials, bypassed 3 dormant firewalls, and entered through a maintenance port only 3 people had ever known about. 2 of them had left Nexora. The third was me. The system welcomed me back like nothing had changed. Because, technically, nothing had. Not yet. StratusNet's global deployment command console blinked calmly. Status: dormant. Phase 3. Authorization: pending. It was waiting. No alerts. No errors. No blinking red lights. Just waiting. My biometric signature was still required, and I hadn't given it. I hovered over the field marked execute. 1 tap, and the system would launch. But I didn't touch it. Because this wasn't an act of rebellion. It was an act of restraint. This was the very safeguard I designed years ago, back when executives still asked questions, when security wasn't treated like a roadblock, when systems were meant to protect not just infrastructure, but intent. Miles hadn't revoked my key because he didn't know it existed. Or worse, he thought someone else had taken care of it. That was always his flaw. He trusted perception over architecture, speeches over systems, optics over logic. And now here we were. I didn't need to sabotage anything. The system didn't need to crash. All I had to do was nothing. No go, no override, no signature. Just silence. But silence without clarity is dangerous. So I opened a fresh terminal window and began extracting the logs, every access record, every token ping, every attempt to bypass the final gate. I compressed them into an encrypted archive and backed them up offline. Then emailed them to myself. Subject: System integrity. Snapshot: legal reference only. There. No tampering. No interference, just proof. A system built to protect itself from people who no longer respected the hands that built it. Across the city, they were likely setting up lights and chairs, microphones, coffee carts, a podium draped in bold letters that read, Nexora 2.0, reinventing the future. And the future was stuck. Not broken. Not failed. Just paused. Held in place by 5 words etched into walnut wood. Build what they can't steal. They thought they could move forward without you, but they forgot who wrote the rules. If you've ever let silence speak louder than shouting, share your story below. You're not alone. 1:19 a.m. Inside Nexora's command center, nothing was moving. The countdown clock bold, confident, perfectly branded in shades of cobalt and slated frozen at launch phase 3. Initializing. And then, nothing. No sync. No deployment. No global rollout. Just a room full of executives and engineers watching a system that was supposed to make history refuse to respond. I wasn't there, but I could picture it clearly. The tightly crossed arms. The tapping pens. The forced smiles beginning to crack. The pressure spreading through the air like a rising storm no one could admit was real. Miles was probably still standing in the center, trying to hold onto the room with posture alone. He had always been good at posture. The silence was growing louder now. Not the productive kind, the kind that signals anticipation. No, this was the silence that eats certainty. The kind that makes people finally ask questions they should have asked weeks ago. Why isn't it working? Who still has access? Did we miss something? The tech leads were likely digging through logs, cycling terminals, restarting processes that weren't broken. Because the problem wasn't code. It was absence. At 1:23, a member of legal someone I'd seen once in a hallway stood up holding a tablet. Her voice probably shook when she said it. Clause 7.4. Final deployment requires authentication from both the COO and the originating system architect. The room must have gone still. Someone probably whispered, "She's gone." Another might have asked, "Can we override?" And then came the worst answer any room like that can hear. Number. I imagined Miles' then jaw clenched, voice dropping into that tight-lipped, condescending register he used when things slipped out of his control. What do you mean we can't override it? The legal rep read again, maybe more slowly this time. The clause is hard-coded, biometric, non-transferable. If not authenticated by 1:17 p.m., license expires and deployment enters lockdown. There it was. The line they'd signed. The line they'd forgotten. I didn't need to be in the building to hear what happened next. I knew the rhythm of rooms like that. The rustle of papers. The quiet curse words. The quick glances no one wants to be caught making. They were looking for someone to blame. And I was nowhere to be found. Instead, I was sitting on my balcony, phone face down, tea cooling beside me, listening to birds instead of panic. The system was doing exactly what it was built to do. Protect itself. Wait for the right hands. Say no when no one else would. And in that silence in both ends, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Peace. Not vindication. Not revenge. Just the kind of clarity that only comes when truth echoes back louder than applause ever could. The email came in at 1:46 a.m., 1 minute before the license expired. The subject line was polite, formal, and trembling beneath the weight of urgency. Request for reinstatement, time sensitive. It came from board@nexora.com. Not from Miles. Not from legal. From the very top. I stared at the screen as the preview loaded. No subject line could have masked what I already knew was inside. They had realized. Too late. I opened it anyway. Miss Hart. On behalf of the board of directors, We wish to acknowledge the unfortunate sequence of events that has taken place over the past 72 hours. Your role as lead architect of StratusNet has become a point of critical dependency, and it is now clear that your contributions have been both undervalued and misunderstood. We respectfully request your cooperation in reinstating deployment authorization. Please advise us on the terms of your return. Sincerely, the Nexora Board of Directors. It was everything they thought a reconciliation should be. Neutral, concise, and stripped of apology. No names. No ownership. Just misunderstood. I read it twice. Then a third time. And still, not one word acknowledged the moment they humiliated me in front of an entire company. Not one word addressed the silence they let settle after I disappeared. They were asking for permission without asking for forgiveness. I minimized the email. Didn't delete it. Didn't respond. I didn't need to. Across the city, they were likely scrambling, holding emergency calls, drafting statements that would never be released. I could almost hear the hum of tension inside the walls I once walked through, now pulsing with the realization that this wasn't about a missed file or a crashed server. This was about a boundary. A line they crossed, thinking there would be no consequence. But they were wrong. They thought removing my title would remove my authority. They thought stripping my badge would revoke my power. But they never understood the kind of system I built on that didn't bend to titles, but to trust. One that waited. And remembered. They didn't just lose access. They lost the right to ask. I stood up from my desk and poured myself another cup of tea. Chamomile this time. Something warm. Gentle. The kind of calm that doesn't come from winning, but from choosing not to lose yourself. The email was still sitting there, still blinking unread in the corner of my screen. But I didn't click it again. Didn't flag it. Didn't forward it. Didn't reply. Because not every silence needs to be filled. Some silences are answers. And this one? This was mine. The room wasn't grand. No uplighting. No branded backdrops. No VIP section. Just a modest community center conference room 2 blocks off Union Square, with folding chairs arranged in a half circle and a projector screen that hummed when it warmed up. Most of the people in the room didn't know who I was. A few did. They glanced over like they were seeing a ghost. And maybe, in a way, they were. I wore no badge. No company affiliation. Just jeans, a dark sweater, and the same pair of boots I wore the day I was erased. At 1:30 p.m., I stepped to the front of the room. No applause, no introduction. Just a quiet shift of attention. I plugged in the small wooden USB and watched the screen come to life. The StratusNet core framework filled the wall behind me, line after line of logic, security layers, operational schema, unfiltered, unpolished. Mine. I cleared my throat. My name is Leona Hart. 19 years ago, I started building an infrastructure system that could survive the people who tried to own it. There was no PowerPoint, no clickbait title, just truth. Today, I'm releasing StratusNet, I said. A decentralized, open-source architecture built for ethical deployment, built for the public. Some leaned in. Others sat straighter. I continued. This version cannot be activated by force. It cannot be scaled without consent. It will only operate under one condition, that the deploying organization signs the Ethical Deployment Covenant. I held up a physical copy, 3 pages, no fine print. 1. Transparent data use. 2. Inviolable user consent. 3. Zero tolerance for covert surveillance. I walked through the terms slowly, letting the room feel the weight of every word. This isn't about licensing, I added. It's about boundaries. Because what we build should reflect what we believe, not just what we can get away with. Someone in the back raised a hand. A younger woman, laptop open on her knees. What about Nexora? She asked, her voice soft but firm. Will they be able to use this? I paused. The answer came naturally. They no longer meet the threshold, I said. Not technically, not ethically. A quiet ripple moved through the room. Not a reaction of drama about recognition, like a tide turning without shouting. That afternoon, Nexora's CTO submitted a request for access to StratusNet M. It was rejected instantly. They hadn't signed the covenant. They hadn't even read it. Because they still didn't understand. They thought this was about access. About control. About recovering what they lost. But this wasn't about going back. This was about resetting the rules. And this time, the system would speak for itself. The first time I heard the name Skyhaven Tech, it was buried in the subject line of an email I almost didn't open. Exploring a new infrastructure direction. Invitation to connect. There were no buzzwords. No fake urgency. Just a message from someone named Elna Voss, who introduced herself as CEO of a company I'd never worked with, but who clearly knew exactly what I had built. She wrote plainly. No flattery. No corporate filler. Just intention. We've reviewed your release of StratusNet. We're not interested in a product. We're interested in building a foundation with values that don't shift depending on market pressure. We'd like you to lead that effort. On your terms. I sat with that sentence for a long time. On your terms. It felt foreign. Almost suspicious. I didn't respond right away. I let it sit for a day. Then 2. I needed to know if this was another attempt at image recovery. Another rebranding of old habits in a new wrapper. So, I asked one question. Just one. Did you sign the covenant? The reply came in under 6 minutes. We signed it yesterday. All 3 principals. All departments. We don't want to work around the system. We want to work inside it with integrity. I closed my laptop and, for the first time in weeks, felt something shift in my chest. Not adrenaline. Not pride. Possibility. Later that week, Nexora sent another email. Not from the board this time, but from a mid-level director who clearly got assigned the uncomfortable job. It read more like a script than a letter. We acknowledge recent complications and would welcome a conversation about reintegration and future collaboration. Reintegration. Like I was a system they could reboot. I didn't reply. Closure didn't come in the form of revenge, or some cinematic takedown in a boardroom. It came in an inbox. In the contrast between 2 emails. One, still pretending nothing happened. The other, ready to start over with intention. I chose the second. A few days later, I walked past the Nexora building downtown. It looked the same. All glass and polish. Branding crisp. Screens looping with phrases like adaptive innovation and next-gen transformation. But I didn't look up. I didn't slow down. I crossed the street to a small cafe on the corner where Elna had invited me for our first in-person conversation. She was already seated, coffee in hand, a thick folder of documents beside her printed, highlighted, with notes in the margins. She looked up and smiled. Welcome back to the table, Leona. And just like that, I was building again. But not from scratch. This time, I wasn't entering someone else's system. I was helping define it. Not because I wanted credit. Not because I needed to be proven right. But because I finally understood. Closure doesn't come when they ask you back. It comes when you no longer need the door they locked behind you. The sun had started to set when I arrived at the little cafe just off 7th and Bellamy. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, just intentional. No one rushing. No phones ringing. Just the low murmur of conversations and the sound of a milk frother behind the counter. I spotted her immediately, my daughter, Camille. Same soft eyes, same quiet fire in her posture. She waved when she saw me and pushed a cup of tea across the table before I even sat down. Chamomile, of course. She always remembered. I placed my satchel on the chair beside me and eased into the moment. It felt like the first breath I'd taken all week that didn't have code or conflict attached to it. She studied me for a second. You look lighter, she said. I smiled. I think I am. There was a pause. Not awkward, just real. She reached into her own bag and pulled something out, an old lanyard I hadn't seen in years. It still had my first Nexora badge on it, faded at the edges, the laminate bubbling a little near the barcode. "I found this cleaning out the closet," she said. "Thought you might want it back." I turned it over in my hand. There I was. Younger, determined, unaware. "That was the year you missed my graduation," she added quietly, not to guilt me, just to name it. "I know," I whispered. "And I never forgot." "I know you didn't," she said. "That's why I gave you the USB." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled it out, the walnut casing, the familiar weight, the words still carved into its surface. "Build what they can't steal." She looked at it, then back at me. "It's still yours, Mom, no matter what they tried to do." I nodded, but this time I placed it back in her hand. She blinked. I smiled. "It's not about protecting systems anymore," I said. "It's about teaching you how to protect your own boundaries." She didn't say anything right away. She just held the drive for a moment, like she understood what it meant. And she did. Because boundaries aren't just about keeping others out. They're about honoring what you've built, what you've survived, what you choose to carry forward. This wasn't a passing of the torch. I wasn't done building. But it was the moment I stopped holding it all alone. For the first time in 19 years, I wasn't guarding something from being stolen. I was letting it become something bigger than just mine. Across the street, Nexora's lights flickered on behind tinted glass. I didn't look. I didn't need to. They had their systems, their slides, their stories. But I had something else. Legacy, not as a claim, but as a boundary. Drum, held, and, finally, shared. There's a moment, just before the train leaves the platform, when everything is still. Not because nothing is moving, but because you are. Internally, quietly. Finally. That was me, standing on the edge of track 6, one hand on the railing, the other wrapped around the strap of my satchel. I had no badge, no title, no access key to scan. Just a soft leather bag, a warm cup of tea in a to-go sleeve, and a future that this time didn't belong to anyone else. The world kept spinning. So did Nexora. Press releases would be drafted. The boardroom would rearrange itself like nothing ever happened. Someone else would eventually get credit for calming the chaos. And the public? They'd forget. But I wouldn't. Because the lesson wasn't for them. It was for me. They fired me at 1:03 a.m. in front of 200 people. But at 11:47, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't file a lawsuit. I didn't storm the stage. I didn't even press send. I just let the system speak. Because sometimes the loudest thing you can do is nothing at all. Let the silence become a boundary. Let the silence become a mirror. Let the silence become a structure no one else can bend. That was the part they never understood. They thought strength looked like control, like visibility, like holding the microphone. But real strength? It's knowing when to walk away, knowing when not to explain yourself again, knowing that not everyone deserves access to what you've spent a lifetime building. They tried to rewrite my story without me. But you can't overwrite integrity. You can't edit out the architecture if the foundation still bears your name. And legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you leave untouched. They took the building. I kept the blueprint. They got the headline. I kept the truth. They tried to erase me. But the silence I left behind? It echoed louder than anything they published. So if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, cut out, talked over, or told you're no longer relevant, let me say this plainly. You are not disposable. You are not invisible. You are not finished just because they stopped watching. You know who you are. And that is enough. You don't have to fight to be seen. Sometimes, you just have to stop shrinking. If this story reminded you of your own, of something you've survived, or something you're still carrying, leave a comment below. And if you believe voices like this deserve to be heard, share this video and subscribe. Because sometimes, the quietest ones rewrite the ending.